Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's okay to say good morning back. Welcome to Block 2. My name is Tiffany Kelly. I'm the Director of Alumni and Family Relations, and I want to acknowledge that Colorado College, on which we stand and sit, is located within the unceded territory of the Ute peoples. Other tribes who historically use and continue to use the land also include the Apache, Arapaho, Comanche, and Cheyenne. On behalf of the Academic Events Committee, it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Erin Stoller. Erin is Assistant Vice Provost for First Year Student Success and Director of Academic Programs at Colorado College. He is a transdisciplinary philosopher and critical theorist whose work explores the socio-political and organizational context of teaching and learning in the academy, the role of universities in democratic knowledge economies, and the epistemic cultures of disciplines. Dr. Stoller has published 2 books and more than 20 peer-reviewed articles on these topics, including in Issues in Interdisciplinary Studies, Radical Teacher, the Journal of General Education, the Journal of Aesthetics and Phenomenology, Transactions of the C.S. Peirce Society, and the Journal of Curriculum Studies. He has been an invited speaker both nationally and internationally, including at Virginia Tech, Vanderbilt University, Quest University, and the Center for Problem-Oriented Learning at Roskilde University, Denmark. He also serves on the editorial boards of 3 journals, John Dewey Studies, Research and Education, and Learning Communities Research and Practice. Dr. Stoller is finalizing his 3rd book project, tentatively titled The Creative University, which explores the epistemic constraints on organizational creativity in the academy. Please join me in welcoming Erin Stoller.
Thanks, Tiffany. Good morning. I'm Erin Stoller, and on behalf of the Common Read Selection Committee, I would like to welcome you all to our discussion of this year's Common Read. Before moving directly into our conversation with the author, I want to offer the students, and especially the incoming students, a bit of context regarding the tradition of the Common Read here at CC, and the selection of this book in particular. The Common Read has been a tradition at Colorado College since 1970. Each year, the campus makes recommendations which are reviewed by a panel of faculty, students, and staff. The Common Read is selected based on a number of criteria, but particularly, we look for texts that value diverse cultural perspectives and raise important questions around anti-racism and issues of equity and power. And we believe that No Ashes in the Fire makes a significant contribution in this regard. Following the tradition we established 2 years ago, rather than having the author give a talk on their work, we want to use this opportunity to invite discussion of the text and to model for our incoming students how we engage in dialogue with one another as members of a community around these issues. Now I'd like to introduce our conversation partners this morning, Dr. Heidi Lewis and Mr. Darnell Moore. Heidi R. Lewis is Director and Associate Professor of the Feminist and Gender Studies Program and inaugural coordinator of early career faculty development programs at CC. Her intellectual areas of specialization are feminist theory, politics, and discourse, particularly Black feminism, hip hop culture and discourse with an emphasis on rap, and critical media studies. She's published widely on these topics, including in the Cultural Impact of Kanye West, the Journal of Popular Culture, the Journal of Black Sexuality and Relationships, and the German language text Indivisible Alliances Against Racism. She's also the author of forthcoming essays examining FX's The Shield, VH1's Love and Hip Hop, Bravo's Married to Medicine, and the relationship between expertise and women's studies. She has contributed to Mark Anthony Neal's New Black Men, NPR's Here and Now, Bitch Media, and Act Out, and has given talks at Vanderbilt, the Motherhood Initiative for Research and Community Involvement, Cornell, the U.S. Olympic Committee, Portland State, and many more organizations and institutions, especially in the U.S. and Germany. Dr. Lewis's first book, in Audre Lorde's Footsteps, Transnational Kitchen Table Talk in Berlin, co-edited with Dana Maria Asbury and Colorado College alum Jaslyn Tate Andrews is forthcoming next month. Darnell Moore is a social media maker, educator, writer, and thought leader whose work on marginal identity, equity, and social justice has enabled him to be in community with those creating impact in the US and abroad over the past 2 decades. He's currently Director of Inclusion for Content and Marketing at Netflix and was former head of strategy and programs at Breakthrough US, a global socially innovative creative hub that uses media, art, and tech to shift gender norms. In his recent past, he served as editor-at-large at Cassius and a former senior editor and correspondent at Mike. In both roles, his editorial content, both video and textual, centered on issues of diverse identities, equity, and social transformation. Darnell is a prolific writer and author of the 2019 Lambda Literary Award-nominated memoir and this year's CC Common Read, No Ashes in the Fire, Coming of Age, Black and Free in America, which was listed as a 2018 New York Times notable book and a 2018 Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers pick. He's received numerous honors for his work, including the 2012 Humanitarian Award from the American Conference on Diversity for his advocacy in the city of Newark, where he served as chair of LGBTQ Concerns Advisory Commission, the 2012 Outstanding Academic Leadership Award from Rutgers University LGBTQ and Diversity Resource Center for his contributions for developing the Queer Newark Oral History Project, the 2013 Angel Award from Gay Men of African Descent, and the 2014 Gentleman of the Year Award from the Gentleman's Foundation. He was listed as one of Planned Parenthood's top 99 dream keepers, was featured in USA Today's In Their Own Words multimedia feature on contemporary civil rights activists, was named among Ebony Magazine's 2015 Power 100, Time Out New York's 8 LGBT influencers, Be Modern Man 100, the Root 100 in 2016 and 2018, and the 2009 Queerty Pride 50. So please join me again in welcoming Heidi and Darnell.
First and foremost, thank you to every single person who made this moment possible. Darnell, you're a bad man. I mean, sheesh.
I was literally melting as I borrowed these ready.
I mean, I knew, but you know, when you hear red, it's different. Welcome to Colorado Springs. Welcome to CC. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us today to discuss No Ashes in the Fire. Let me give a little bit more of a personal introduction to me and you. So 8 years ago, and I have notes, of course, because a good amount of people in this audience know I can get real tangential. 8 years ago, in February, I became a member of the editorial collective for The Feminist Wire under the leadership of Darnell, Dr. Monica Casper, and the website's co-founder, Dr. Tamora Lomax. 7 months later, Darnell invited me to co-edit the site's Love as a Radical Act Form with him. The very next month, Darnell invited me to sound off about the video for Rihanna's Pour It Up alongside Janet Mock and Sylvia Harvey, a short piece that I eventually developed into a full-length article for the Journal of Sexuality, Black Sexuality and Relationships. So we go way back. We've shared laughter, frustration, and so much joy. I'm so glad we have this time.
It's an inside joke. Yeah.
It's an inside joke. One time, Darnell, I'm gonna tell a little bit of the story. Should I do something about this? I'm like, I told you I was loud. I really need it. Darnell and I were having a tense conversation. We was fussing back and forth, and he's busy. You just heard everything. And so near the end of it, he was like, sis, I'm so glad we had this time. And I was like, is he trying to get off the phone with me? Like, I'm really serious. And so now it's like a calling card between our whole little crew. That's what we say when it's time to wrap it up. But most importantly, thank you for this incredible work of art. Thank you for some of the most powerful phrasing I have ever heard or read in my life. Audacious endurance, calculated calamity, extrajudicial liquidation, carnal bareness, fugitive freedom. Thank you for the beauty, the horror, the joy, the love, the vulnerability, the complexity, the accountability, the forgiveness, and the permission to engage and embrace it all. Thank you for your attention to the relationships between the individual, the communal, and the institutional. You wrote that thing, didn't you?
Thank you.
You wrote it. So let's get into the question. So the last paragraph of Run, which is chapter 5, reads, returning to campus mended could only happen if I was brave enough to piece myself back together and live once again. If I were to run this time, it would be toward and not away from the fight. Some fights, however, we must be willing to lose. Please discuss how you've come to make these determinations and how that may have changed over time. How do you know when a fight must be lost and when it must be won, or even something else in between?
Yeah, so first of all, it's so good to be here. I'm really honored. Heidi, thank you for suggesting that my book be considered. And you should all know this is the first time I've had like in-person public conversation in 2 years. So if I'm shaking a little bit, it's because y'all like the first people I talked to in a long time. And also, I didn't realize how high the elevation is here. So I got up this morning, I was like, should I be going to the doctor? So I think I might be having asthma attack. Anyway, that said, I'm glad we started with that quote, partially because I was reflecting on my experience as an undergrad student and all of the battles that I sort of had to endure as a young person coming into knowledges of oneself. The battles that I knew that I waged had so much to do with me trying to live my life in such a way that I made myself uncomfortable for the comfort of everybody else. In other words, like for many of us who grow up being told lies about ourselves, you know, being Black, being told that, you know, my sort of opportunities in the world would be cheapened or lessened because of the fact of my Blackness or because of where I come from, or being a person who was coming into my queerness and being told that I was hell-bound or sinful or wrong, morally wrong. I fought a lot of battles with other people, with institutions, with groups of people who had ideas about me that weren't true. And that's exhausting. It's exhausting, right? It's exhausting to always have to push back against what you know to be not to be true about yourself. So that's one way, like one of the battles I knew I wouldn't fight anymore was the battle to be seen, to be legible, to be understood as worthy of other people's respect, worthy of love, worthy of safety, right? I'm not going to be sitting up here doing all this for y'all to like me. If you don't like the way I move my hands, if you don't like the way I love, if you don't like how I move in the world, if you don't like the color of my skin, that's your problem. And what I wasn't going to do was spend a good portion of my life trying to manipulate other people into loving me when I know that I'm worthy by virtue of just waking up every day being alive. So that's one thing. The other thing I'll say here is that a big part of the battle that I found myself on was unlearning all of those lies, like unlearning all of the things that I was told to sort of think about me, the lessons that I learned. And some of the stuff I benefited from, y'all. You know, I got to a campus and I was like really trying to play the role of this hard, cis, straight appearing dude on campus. And I was thinking about how the lessons that we learn through a sort of culture of patriarchy and misogyny, or a culture that tells us, like, and we breathe in on like osmosis, that to be seen and sort of celebrated as a quote unquote real man is to show up with non-feeling, is to show up hard, you know, it's to show up wearing blue and not pink or whatever the lies are. And I really tried my best, right? Because I knew that part of what would make me feel safe, part of what would make me feel seen is by appealing to all those things. And that's tiring and exhausting. So I always say now that some battles are meant to be lost. Manhood, like the striving, all of this work I did to become sort of like masculine. I say now, like, I don't really respond well to when people ask me, what does it mean to be a man? I say, what I actually want to fail at that project. I want to fail at any project that has been organized, decided for me far before I had a chance to do so for myself. I don't want to be seen as a good or better man. I want to actually be seen as someone who gave that the middle finger and who decided on their own to become the best human person that they can be. So I think I would say that that is what my decision has been, my decision-making process.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it because honestly, even on the second read of the book, I'm not sure that that's what I understood that to mean. And hearing you speak about it that way makes a lot of sense. And I can't wait to meditate on it because it's a battle, like you said, many of us who've been told we're wrong or in the wrong spaces struggle with. So thank you for that. I want to talk about the church, which figures so prominently in the text. And thank you for that complex treatment of this space that has been so beautiful and horrific for so many of us for so many reasons. In chapter 6, Becoming, you write, I'm gonna quote again, sorry I didn't make that clear the first time. The church had harmed me more than it healed me, but I stayed because I had become attracted to self-debasement. I stayed on my knees. The church seems to prefer those believers who move about in degradation, never those journeying forward with heads held high. And that resonated with me because it seems like I grew up in the church. My mother's father was an AME reverend. My husband grew up Baptist in the South. And it seems like the most trouble that people who are committed to a particular way of doing Black religion in church have with me is when I tell the truth about myself. So when I say like, I can be evil, I can be ruthless, they're like, don't say that. I'm like, but it's true. And so I'm like, tell the truth, shame the devil is a lie, not me. But when I read that again, it hit me because I was wondering if there's a connection and I'm still not sure. So I'm hoping that you could talk a little bit more about your theory here and any experiences you've had discussing that with Black folks committed to the church and various forms of religion.
Yeah, for sure. That's a profound question. And of course, Dr. Lewis would be quoting me stuff that I forgot that I said.
I'm gonna do it to you.
But it's interesting as you were reading that, I kept thinking about how a Christian theology that sort of serves a variety of other things, white supremacy. I mean, you can clearly replace church in there and put white supremacy, right? Or patriarchy, or any of these sort of other quote unquote systems of oppression, demands of us sort of to lie about a lot of things. And I always say to love is to not lie. So what would that look like? What would it look like to, in any space that demands of us, and I don't know why lying now has become like the leitmotif for all of the things I'm saying. Maybe that's a word.
Maybe it's a word.
But like, you know, I do remember the days where I was a church boy. Y'all can probably tell from it. Y'all see my slacks?
Yes.
Like, it's a little churchy. I've been redeemed and delivered though. But I was a church boy who grew up being taught to pour love into a God who held back that love from me. So that means I spent a lot of time in somebody's altar, debasing myself, hating myself, while illogically loving with all of my heart a God who I was supposed to be a reflection of. And that did many of those around me good, until I began to sort of deconstruct and push back against and name the type of theological violence that was enacting upon me. I remember I had a friend. By the way, I graduated from seminary, and like, I don't know, from any seminary folk or people who are interested in it, most times they'll tell you, you go to seminary, you come out probably not liking the church as much. Sort of what happened to me. So in seminary, I'm talking to a good friend of mine who was a church boy too. And he says, Darnell, I mean, you're gay. Like, aren't you afraid of going to hell? And I remember turning it, see, seminary will also give you language, right?
Mhm.
And courage. And I said to him, I was like, you know what? And I'll say his name because he tells the story to everybody. Andre, if it's meant that that I'm going to hell for telling the truth, I would rather go to hell than to go to heaven skating on a lie about myself.
Mhm.
And if that's the type of God or the type of theology that you think serves you well, it doesn't serve me well. Because hell, as you imagine it, is a place, in my case, where a person is being sent for wanting to ascend to a type of integrity, for being honest about oneself, for wanting to become the person that I know God made me to be. And I don't want to be in heaven with nobody like that. That's opposite. First of all, it's going to be boring as
I
hell.
say that all the time. I'm like, y'all can go. I'm gonna go
I don't
right
want
the
that.
hell.
Like, I don't want that.
Hell about to be lit.
I mean, just lying and bored and like,
I'm telling you.
you know what I mean? I'm like,
swear to God.
I literally was like, I do not want them go highways, baby. Keep that. Send me down to the heathen, like truth telling,
Please.
you know?
Jesus gonna be there.
But I think that but I think that that's the point that I was trying to make.
I felt
That
that.
often it is the case
I felt that.
where our sort of self-revelatory truths are so disarming, are seen as destructive, are threats to people who want to firmly hold power in place. And that to me is a disruptive, revelatory, powerful act to come into a new sense of self and to name that even against the lies that other people tell us.
I appreciate that so much. And it makes me think about the one of the other questions I had. I'm gonna skip order because when you write about hell in the book, you name it as persisting in the hearts and minds of those who believe that LGBT people and all others who reject the tyrannical dictums of the powerful. I mean, the phrases. Listen, it was church reading the book, but you name hell as persisting in the hearts and minds of those people who believe that LGBT people and all others who reject the tyrannical dictums of the powerful would forever be punished. In what ways do you confront that type of hell today? And since we're facing an audience primarily composed of undergraduate students, what advice do you have for young people confronting such tyranny in spaces like this, as well as other spaces where, you know, this kind of tyranny thrives?
So we are having this conversation in Colorado Springs, right? In Colorado, in the US, in the global north, right? So every day we wake up having to, in many ways, war against, battle some form of tyranny, some form of systemic, ideological, in some ways, very material oppressions that come our way. So the first thing I'll say, I'll take a step back. I'm really empathic with folk who have had to unlearn truths that have become integral to who they understand themselves to be. Me getting to a point to tell my friend, you know, I'd rather go to hell, meant that I had to let go of so much of what I knew in my heart to be true. Like I said, then I was like, oh, that's the biggest sin I probably ever, you know. So it's not easy. It is not easy turning a thing on its head. It's not easy to take what has been told to us and things that we breathed in, and we breathe in like air every day, and pushing against that. It wasn't easy to look in the mirror and to see my skin color and to love it back. After years of both verbal and nonverbal communication to me that to be a Black person whose skin is dark, whose nose is wide, whose lips are big, is to be ugly. You know why? Because beauty looks like the white Barbie doll that I saw. It wasn't easy. It sounds easy because I'm on a stage talking about it, right? It wasn't easy being able to sort of love myself out of the hell of heteronormativity and homo antagonism. It sounds easy. It sounds easy. Like now I can go to people and be like, my partner, he fly.
I'm talking about for real too.
He is fly though, for real.
Oh my God.
Follow him on Instagram. I'm joking. Don't do that. He'll be so pissed. But it sounds easy, but it took a long time and a lot of internal work and a lot of validation from community to look in the mirror and see someone who was worthy of not only being loved, but being alive. So what I'm saying is, like, you know, particularly as a very vulnerable young person in college who was in a predominantly white institution, Seton Hall was Roman Catholic, right? Like, you know, we barely talked about sex, let alone sexuality and sexual identity. So a big part of that work is, you know, I had to summon a lot of strength, internal strength. And I had to tag on to people around me within community who could help me know the difference. Who could help me know the difference between the things that I was taught that was serving me well and the things that were trying to sort of like deliberately take me out. So I would say, you know, community is going to be super key. The other thing I would say is, you know, I often say the power of self-reflection is that it's a superpower. You know, I mean, I think about queerness, not in terms of our identity category, but I call queerness magic. Because it takes a type of magic to get up every day in a world that tell you you're not even supposed to be here, and reinvent yourself to breathe, and even in high elevation climate like places like this, and to keep going every single day.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And community becomes really important for those of us who are particularly isolated in places like this, you know, because, and at least for me, and this is my 11th year here, and to
Well, can we give applause for that? That's a
thank
good
you.
deal.
Sure. See,
I ain't never stayed nowhere for 11 years. I'm gonna just tell y'all that.
me either.
That's amazing.
Thank you. But see, this is exactly what I mean, you know, by being in community with, you know, people like you and Aisha and Tamora and so many people who held me close when, I mean, I don't have any family here. My husband is my only family here, blood, and my kids. And so, you know, that's a lot of pressure to be somebody's entire community and to be so isolated from a good chunk. I would say 98% of the people who, you know, I would put on the list, the people who can pick my kids up from school. Shout out to Naomi. I know you out here. She on it. For real. Rushan and Chantal on it. So it's not to say I don't have people here that are that, but to not have a wealth of that kind of love and that kind of support, and to try to do self-reflection is difficult because you start to, or at least I have, to confuse what is being said about you with what you need to say about yourself, right? So there have been times where I've been angry here and held myself accountable for it, but in a way that was scary because I'm like, is that them talking to me or is that me talking to me? So I think what you're saying is really important because when I'm in community with people like you and my family at a distance, it helps me to keep myself focused on myself.
We can say, sis, I'm so glad we had this time.
Right? Because but it could get so confusing because I'm like, wait. So I appreciate you telling them that because I tell them that too. I mean, it's only so much of the narrative that exists about us here that I'm going to continue to even hear, let alone to address. Speaking of accountability, oh my goodness, I really appreciated you sharing the story about Newark's Gay Pride event in 2008 with us in Lessons, that's chapter 8, because you wrote about holding yourself accountable for, and I quote, the deeply ingrained commitments to male dominance and sexism that you had, and for being more comfortable pointing your finger at others like an itinerant evangelist of myopic gospel, of a myopic gospel of Black liberation. Another phrase that knocked me into next Tuesday when I read it again. I'm gonna read it again just so you hear it. You tell us that you were less comfortable holding yourself accountable for that deeply ingrained commitment to male dominance and sexism, and that you felt more comfortable pointing your finger at others like an itinerant evangelist of a myopic gospel of Black liberation. That's deep. Yeah, through that. That's deep. Whoosh. How do you continue renewing your commitment to accountability along those lines? How do you know when it's necessary for you to stand tall on behalf of Black life and when you might be trafficking in that misogyny?
Yeah. So I'll say a big part of the work that I tried to do in memoir is really easy to write oneself in the book as a hero, as uncomplicated. You're either like the hero or the victim, like never the complexity in between. And you all know, I'll just like sort of let me span out broader for a moment. I do think we exist in a moment where so many of us have access to all the right language. I will whip out intersectionality as a term. I'll start talking about, violence and all these ideas, capitalism and these things that become so abstract. And we're really good in this, particularly in this social media age, right? We can, if there's nothing else we can do, we can give a critique. We can tell somebody they wrong as hell and use the sharpest poetic language. By the time you finish reading that, you are wow.
Capitalist, ableist, patriarchal. I tell my
Here's the
students all the time,
thing.
y'all can rattle off a phrase, honey.
But the thing about what I've learned for myself is that I became really, really apt at naming the feet that were on my neck. Think about this. I could point the finger and talk to you about anti-Black racism. I could point the finger and critique you about queerness, right? But I wasn't good at naming the necks my feet were on. And guess what? All of us got our feet on somebody's neck.
Preach.
So I was like, we have been good at the first layer of work, examining and pushing against the systems out there. I haven't been good at looking at the I in the intersection, at looking at the way that I exist within the very structures that I sometimes critique and have been complicit in maintaining and have benefited me. And guess what the third part of the work is? Really hard. And that's why we don't do the second part. After you figure out that your feet is on somebody's neck, you got to take them damn things off. And who wants to do that? So for me, and I love being able to say this to you all because I think you can get up ahead of this far before you get so better at the first part. I know I'm dealing with somebody that's really doing the work when you can come to me and say, bet, I get how all this is working. I'm a queer person. Yeah, and there's a Me Too movement, right? We're talking about Me Too movement, and guess what? Queer people are, and as a cisgender man, I still am complicit and benefit from patriarchy and sexism and misogyny. As a cis person, I know that I can make trans antagonism a real palpable thing and experience for somebody else. As a person on this campus, as a student, yes, I may have all the language, but my access to this place itself
do that.
positions me, right? So for me, like, I had been tired of like just ringing the alarm. Ringing the alarm when everybody else shows up as if, and I'm like, what is your work, D? Your work is to undo yourself, to look at the monstrosity in yourself. And that is how you make the world a better place. So that's sort of where that was coming from.
I really appreciate that. Just last year I was having a professional conversation with some people. And of course, we're talking about anti-Black racism. So I'm getting sort of dragged behind my back where it's always comfortable for people to do that because of my focus on anti-Black racism. But nobody wants to talk about the fact that I identify myself as a lifelong homophobe. I'm like, how could you skip that part? That was integral to my whole sentence. So I think not only is it difficult for us to do that work ourselves, it's difficult for us to identify when other people do it.
Yeah.
It's like, hello, and I have a queer daughter. And I tell people all the time, I guarantee you when she has her first kiss in front of me, I'm a twitch. You know how I rarely see women kiss, rarely. But that's what I mean. When I identify those parts of myself, people are like, don't say that. I'm like, why? It's the truth.
And you need to be able to name that.
You have,
And let me tell you, the other thing is too, like there is a type of perfection, a thing that we try, a self, an avatar that I think the world tends to prefer of us, right? Or me, I'll use I statements. But here's what I know to be true. Even as a queer person, a queer identified person now, I too was a queer antagonistic person because I was taught that. I was socialized into it. It took me until I was 28 to be able to say, this is, y'all had to, let's sit with that for a second. I'm out here, you know, Black and male identified person, loving other male identified people in secret. You know how long it took me to sort of unlearn that? So what I'm saying is it's okay for us to confront those areas that within ourselves, the things that we put our faith in, even if we do so quietly. It's okay to name those things because the naming of them makes them legible. And when they become legible, you can therefore do the work you can do the work to undo it.
mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Like, just because I'm queer don't mean I don't buy into sexism.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So like that work, y'all, is so vital. And I appreciate you just naming that and being brave enough to name it, because the more we name those things, the more we can begin, the more that we can do the work of working against those very
Absolutely,
ideas.
absolutely. And for my last question, and then we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A. And I ask that you respectfully please stay with us until the end of Q&A so that we don't have to contend with all the noise of the traffic exit in the room. I think my favorite line in the whole book is in that chapter. Black love ain't cheap. More specifically, you write, true love removes the walls, those designed by hands that are not our own, which separate Black people from one another. Black love is not cheap. I might get a tattoo somewhere. I swear. Please talk more about what you meant by that and how you engage with that thinking in your life today.
You know, I'll just say quickly, because I would love to just give you all space, but like, you know, Black love, and it's funny that I say Black love. I wasn't, it's going to sound like I'm here. I want to only name it because, okay, whatever. So I was in conversation with Bell Hooks, and we might have been in Colorado, actually.
Huh.
And Val said to me, if you're on, I'm going to mimic her son. And she said something like, well, what do you mean by Black love? You know, like, why is it Black love? Why isn't it love? And I was telling her that I think that modifier is important. I think that modifier is important because there's a type of costly grace that is connected to this work of Black people loving this country. Black people loving themselves within the context of white supremacist ideology and practices. And I think that is that love in the context of the global North, in the context of the West, has been sort of poetically emptied of meaning. And love has been thought of as, like Bonhoeffer would say, like cheap grace, you know? People do you wrong, just love them. Just forgive. They come and they shoot 9, 8 members in your church. But you good Christians, pray about it. Extend grace. Move on. And that's cheap. Costly grace, as Bonhoeffer would say, I think it is a demand for accountability and a change in practices, an ending of the harm. Yeah? And I mean that among Black people too.
Hello.
And I'll end by saying, like, you know, if you've read the book, you would know that, like, I tried to employ a type of costly grace by examining my relationships with my father, who, for a lot of reasons, probably doesn't deserve my love. And it wasn't because he deserved it that I gave it to him. It's because I believe in non-disposability and accountability and transformation. So, you know, I think that's what I'm trying to get at, that I want us to move from cheap versions of love cheapened versions, emptied versions of grace to something that is grounded in what we might call an abolitionist politic that is really about not disposing of people, but also not letting people, like, just letting them go willy-nilly, hurting and harming, without ensuring that whatever the harm and the violence is ends. Yeah.
Thank you so much. As
Thank
you
you.
come to the microphones to ask questions, let's give a round of applause. Thank you so much. We went a little over, but so did they. And we'll begin over here to our left, and then we'll just take turns up until it's probably time for everybody to head to their next function.
Hello. Oh,
Hi.
I don't know how loud I'm being right now, but I guess my question is, what is the one piece of advice that comes to mind when helping people come to terms with their sexuality when like surrounded by so many homophobic people or you know, people that may oppress them?
It's such a good question, and it's a hard one for me to answer, because I think in some ways the work is being placed on the person who is doing their best to live every day with the type of integrity, with a love for self that is not and a lack of support continues to exist. So, you know, I tell people all the time, they're like, you know, queerness is magic. And I'm like, well, magicians get tired too. And it's not that much magic you can do, right? There's work that we can do itself, but there's also environments that we have, that we grow up in, that we maneuver through, that also has to be accountable to do its work, so that that person doesn't have to do the work for self and the work to change the system to make it possible for them to even be here. So maybe this is maybe not the best answer, but what I want to say to anyone who's in that position here, it is not your responsibility, number one, to somehow snap your finger and make all well. It is the work of those positioned particularly on a side of power. So maybe I'm talking to the people in the community for whom that is not their story. It's your job to make it possible for whoever the person is asking that, you know, who's wondering that, to live. And to live with the type of safety and resources that they are worthy of. So to that person, ain't your job to do everybody else's work. This is when it's the work of the quote unquote ally, or what I like to call the accomplice. I like accomplice because accomplices remind me of like my Aunt Barbara. Whenever there was a family fight, pardon the violence, Aunt Barbara with her skinny self is jumping in a fight and swinging on everybody.
Like she did on
Pushing the person, the impacted person, out the way. This wouldn't even my fight, but I'm taking it on, not from the sideline, but I'm getting right in it. So for anybody who's listening, if you're not the person who has to sort of survive as singular within an environment where they're not allowed to fully nurture, you got to be like Aunt Barbara. You got to push people, you got to jump in, be an accomplice in the struggle, so that that question would never need to be asked in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
First off, I just want to say thank you so much for both of you for speaking. It's been so wonderful to listen and get to hear your thoughts.
Thank you.
I really just was curious, as college students and undergrads in particular, we are at this time in our lives where, especially queer people, people of color, we're trying to develop our identity, our self-confidence, that belief that we do deserve to be here and we do deserve to exist in this world. But how does that intersect with this kind of concept that in a lot of ways, sometimes we are still complicit in a system where, you know, we can be hurting others. Like you talked about, we have our feet on someone's neck. So how do you draw the line between I'm developing my self-confidence, I'm going to be proud about who I am and what I believe in, but also knowing I have to uplift those around me?
You just answered it for me. I thank you for that. I think the goal is for us to continue to be okay with the discomfort. Discomfort, and by discomfort, I don't mean sort of like everyday perpetual nagging at the self, but the constant asking of ourselves the question. That's work, yes, and to remind ourselves, yes, somebody's feet on my, but whose neck are my feet on? What am I doing to take it off? So I think allowing ourselves to be situated within that discomfort, not the discomfort that comes from, that's employed on us by others, but what might be the discomfort that comes from self-interrogation, to lean into it. And I think that work is super helpful. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all both for your time. Is this a good volume or? Oh, okay, thank you. So I think, like, as I was reading the book, I saw you talked about, how you were someone who, I guess, turned to religion as a method to cope with internalized homophobia, and I did the same thing. So I was like, it's nice to see your story represented somewhere. And also, I think another part of your experience that, like, I'm starting to understand more is being a person of color, being an international student myself at a PWI. So are there like things or like, pearls of wisdom that you'd like to share with us in terms of how to love ourselves, whether we're being, I guess, coerced by religion, coerced by white supremacy, coerced by things like that? Like, how do we make space for ourselves for love? And do you have, I guess, any comments on that? Thank you.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for coming up to the microphone and being vulnerable enough to share aspects of your own context. And I literally see you. Yeah. The work of coming into a type of love for oneself is an everyday work. I don't see it as like a destination you land at and it's like somehow you're just there. Even with all this gray in my beard, which is a signal that I'm old as hell, I still have to get up and look at myself. And I remember maybe at 28, I looked at myself one day, and it's so funny. I looked in the mirror and I said, and I started talking back to my reflection. I said, I love all of you. I love all of you, especially the things that you were told to hate. And I was looking in the mirror, and I'm like, I love your nose. I love your lips. I love your quirkiness. I love your shaking eyes. I love your queerness. And I said that to myself. And I probably need to practice, and I'm certain I like those are practices that don't stop, So what I would say is like to take seriously this work, and by love, again, I'm not talking about a cheap version of it. And I'm not even being hallmarkish here. But when we constantly hear, and we often put our faith in the you can'ts and the you are's that are told to us by other people, it takes so much reworking of the brain, of the spirit, to unclog those messages and fill them with new ones for self. So I would say, one, to remember that is a journey. It's a journey that we will always find ourselves on. And that's okay to be on that journey. And to give yourself as much as you need for yourself and as you're doing it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then before we take this last question, I have a request. So this person is going to ask their question, B is going to answer it, then I'm going to take a selfie of me and B with the audience. Okay, then after that, you can get out of here. Okay, last question.
Morning.
Hi.
First, thank you for both of you for speaking. I wrote my question down because it was a lot to think about and to remember. So I'm just recite it. So I noticed that you use both a sociological and sort of neoliberal perspective when speaking of your experience with racism and homophobia. Whereas Ta-Nehisi Coates in Between the World and Me deals with similar themes, but sticks pretty much strictly to this sociological perspective and leaves out the notion that you can quote unquote pull yourself up by your bootstraps in America. So my question is, what drew you to structure your memoir with more of a focus on individualism? And do you have any thoughts on the differences between No Ashes in the Fire and Between the World and Me, if you're familiar with?
It's a good question. Wow, profoundly good. I think the first thing I'll say is it was really important for me to offer like a social history that was tied to what we call like life narrative. Only because and I was explaining this to Dr. Lewis, how many of you have ever read a book about Camden, New Jersey before?
Mm.
Right. So I felt it my responsibility, and there's a way that you could sort of do this narratively, probably cleaner, but I felt it my responsibility to not let the reader off the hook by offering them a narrative that they could probably imagine Camden as a sort of site, as a place, without really having the facts of what it was, right? Like there's a way you can read that book and go, oh, woe is the people of Camden who are Black and brown and happen to be working poor, without realizing that there was a calculated political, economic, sort of history genealogy that made the city what it was. And that made the lived experiences of the people in that city what it was, that shaped that experience. And I took a chance because I figured, I knew that some people wouldn't like that. They would read the book and love the personal part and get to this part and go, because I also wanted the reader to be able, regardless of where they exist within the US or wherever, to see themselves in the story of Camden, whether or not they never heard about it or not. And by what I mean by that, like, okay, like when you think about, the lack of powerful, reliable educational infrastructure in Camden, that's connected to a whole history of educational inequity in a lot of places. And our votes, our interests, all of our interests have something to do with that. So that's one thing. What I'll say about the difference is what I tried to do in the book, and I'm not saying it's better or worse, is also write as, from the I perspective, in a more nuanced and complex way, where I was also trying to be a bit self-accountable, looking at my own shit with two as part of the narrative. And I know that a lot of, particularly narratives written and memoirs written by Black male authors, resist that. A lot of it is this, rightly so. But I think with the turn of like Michael Denzel Smith and Kiese Lehman, these sort of more contemporary writers who are also interested in like unpacking themselves on a page, we are seeing a bit of a turn in the sort of Black male heroic trope that tends to get played out. And that was sort of one of the differences I think exists. But great question. I need to think about it some more. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Darnell. Let's do it. Class dismissed. Oh my God, give me a big jacket. Somebody got